Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Register of Information, the Pitfalls. We still have some people joining, but I'll just get through the preliminaries for now. My name is Gerard Joyce. I am a founder and CTO of calQrisk, and we provide GRC solutions, including a solution for the Register of Information and DORA in general. Today's webinar is based on, I suppose, experience of ourselves and our customers and others last year in the submission of the Register of Information. So we're hoping that we can all learn from those, shall we say, experiences. Now, I'm conscious that today we have at least a third of you have not yet submitted a Register of Information. I can tell that by the registration list. So I will cover an overview of basically what the Register of Information is, so you can stay with us. Those who have submitted a Register of Information have been through that traumatic process last year. The good news is that this year it should be smoother. We all know the pitfalls. Well, we hope we know them all. And the regulator has improved the, shall we say, the process and the reporting and the information. So hopefully it's not as traumatic this year for people. So I'm going to talk about just the Register of Information, what it is, the model, the ROI model. This is an important thing, I think, that you're comfortable with, and the relationships. You'll see it in a moment. And if you're trying to avoid errors and rejection, understand the ROI model, the data model, and you'll reduce the likelihood of a rejection. For those of you who have not yet submitted and don't have to submit for some time, start collecting the information now. One of the things our customers did learn is that when you start collecting the information, you realize how much information you're actually missing about your third parties and about the processes, etc. And then I've got a bunch, 5 or 6 slides on the pitfalls, and this is where we go down into the weeds of it, and we might lose some people who've not seen this before, but I will try and explain it for everybody, not just those who've been there, done that, and have worn out the t-shirt. And then on my last slide, I'm going to point you to two websites where you'll find very good documentation to support, certainly augment what I'm going to tell you today, and tools that you can use in the future. Okay. The Register of Information, the ROI, and I've seen over the year people confusing ROI with return on investment, but indeed there is a return on investment if you actually do the work and create a Register of Information, even if you never had to submit it, because apart from it being a regulatory supervisory tool, it's also a good risk management tool for you, because all of us, I would say, all of us have outsourced some part of our business to a third party. We're dependent on third parties for the delivery of the services that we provide our customers. So doesn't it make sense that we manage those, that we understand the risks, and that we are managing those risks? The biggest gripe regulators have today is that too many companies have outsourced stuff and have not managed it, or are not managing it. And they're saying that's not good enough. And indeed, in the middle of last year, there was an additional ITS published, and I would say, to me, it's saying that the regulator wants to know more about the fourth parties and indeed the whole supply chain, because it's third parties is just maybe your first contact point. But if you've got a third party who's got a fourth party who's got a fifth party, somewhere along that supply chain, if there's an interruption, it might affect you, and you need to know about those risks so you can do something about it today. If I was to summarize again for those who've not been down in the trenches, the Register of Information, it's about, first of all, I think, understanding and documenting what are your critical functions, those services that you provide. What are critical in the sense of, if there is a disruption, what do you need to get back up and running quickly, or try not to have any interruption for those critical services. And one of the things you have to do is define how you document how you define. Is that it? What's critical? What's your logic for deciding what's critical? And then you need to look at, well, what third parties are you dependent upon to deliver that? Now, think of this as a business impact analysis. And indeed, it's part of that, because when you do business impact analysis, you look at all your processes and your services and say, well, what do we depend upon? What people do we depend upon? What technology do we depend upon? What third parties do we depend upon? The regulator is interested in the third party side for the Register of Information. And indeed, the third parties, fourth parties. And if your third party is an intragroup, if you're part of a larger organization and you have one group who are signing all the agreements with the fourth parties and you're dealing just with the third party, at one level it's easier, but those fourth parties that are working not directly with you, but through an intergroup, for the most part, the regulator sees those as third parties. Certainly, there's a special place for them on the Register of Information, so it doesn't reduce the effort that much, really. Who are the fourth parties? The only other thing I haven't put in here is that on the critical functions, they go one level deeper, and I have a graphic in a moment for the activities, because there are 123, last time I counted, of licensed activities, and the regulator wants to know what licensed activities are associated with those functions or services that you're providing. So that's another level of granularity. We'll see that in a moment. Don't panic, but this is the Register of Information data model, and this is available on the EBA's website. Get yourself a copy of this. There's a few pages detailing the detail behind each of these tables. There are 14 tables here. That white one at the bottom is not a table, but 14 tables. And if I just move on to the next slide, so you're not trying to read that last one, this is what those 14 tables are. I'm not going to go through each of them because more than half of you know all of this already, but basically the regulator wants you to capture information about your third parties in 14 tables. Now, if you've got a technical mind about you, you'll recognize this is like a relational database, exactly what it is. Because if I take on the 0102, the list of financial entities in scope, you can see that there's a link between those and 4 other tables. All those lines between the different tables are relationships. And we'll talk about more of that in a moment, because some of the pitfalls are that you might have something in one table and you don't have it in the other table, and there'll be it'll be rejected because it's supposed to be in both tables. I'll show you in a moment. But a few of the key things here, I mean, you have 301 and 303 entities signing the agreements who are receiving the services, and then you have entities who are providing the services, maybe an intergroup, and they're signing the contracts, if you like, for the greater company. There's a distinction. The 4.1 is the entities making use of the services. Now, if you're a small organization and you've just one entity, then a lot of this is simplified because you only have one entity and you're signing all the contracts with the third parties, and you're the one who's benefiting. But for larger organizations, and we have some who have multiple entities and multiple entities receiving the benefit, but multiple entities within the organization who, because of the hierarchy, are in scope. 202 is probably the biggest table because it has all the contractual specific information on contractual arrangements, and you've detail like if the information is being stored in 2 countries, then that's 2 records, and if it's 2 activities, that's 4 records, and if it's the data is stored in 2 more countries, then that's 8 records, and very quickly one activity or one third party, 2 activities could lead to 16 records in 0202. Certainly, we've seen very long tables in there because this is where the regulator wants the granularity down to down to the country where the information is stored. And that's only one of 4 country pieces of information you have to put in. Yeah, what else would I point out here? The 501, the third-party service providers. We'll see there that you might have multiple contracts with service providers, but in 501, you just need to put them in there once. But let's have a look more in a bit more detail. Apologies if this looks like a sales pitch, but this is I'm trying to explain with this the relationship between the information you've got to gather. So if you gather all your third-party information, if you're starting off today, put all your third-party information in, and as much as you can of the fourth parties that you know about, and maybe you need to find out more. Then put in all your business services. That's what the regulator calls the functions, the services you provide, and the activities associated with those services. Now, it might be a one-to-one relationship, but we have seen people defining business services with up to 5 activities. There's no rule about it, but you will have at least one. And one thing that emerged last year is that not all of the activities associated with the service are licensed. So what do you do if it's an unlicensed or an activity that doesn't require a license? The regulator actually put in a code that you can put in there, and it's called supporting function. So collect your activities. So the business service has a one-to-many relationship with activities, and then you create those links, and then you might decide, well, to deliver the service, we're dependent on 2 or 3 third parties, and you create those links between the business service and the third party. And then as you find them out, you add in the fourth parties. And the other relationship you need to then, once you've got all the information in the system, I guess, is what entities are benefiting from the service from the third party. And you can see my dotted link in there, so it's not too crowded. Again, if you're just one entity, then this is very simple. But larger organizations have multiple entities, and some entities are not benefiting from some services. So you've that distinction in there as well. So yeah, start gathering the information, because there will be gaps. And one of the things we found when with customers, we created a report, I call it the human-readable report, where we did some data validation, and you could see when stuff was missing. So I'll talk to you about that in a moment. Okay, well, right this moment, the missing information bit. This was by far well, if I go back to 2024, when the regulators did a dry run and they had something like 2,000 submissions, 86% of the something like, I can't remember exactly now, maybe 30,000 errors, but 86% had to do with missing information. So clearly, if you know the information is missing, there's no point in submitting your register, because it'll be rejected. So we, as I said, we created a kind of a text report that did a lot of that validation. Not everything, it's not total data validation, but it'll certainly pick up the missing stuff. If you don't have a contract reference number. Now, we do a lot of contracts for people, and we don't actually have a physical reference number in those. But if you have a legal department, they've probably given it a reference number. And if you don't have a legal department, you're a small company, then you dig out all your contracts and you write a reference number on each of them. But you do need that reference number, because that appears in many places in the report. So you may not have one, but you'll have to come up with one. And as I said, if you have a legal department, then they probably have one, so use theirs. Up to where we started doing this, I had never really come across the legal entity identifier, LEI. Yes, we all know the company registration number for organizations, but the LEI is more of a universal kind of number. And we've been asked for it many times last year, but in the beginning we decided, rather than saying we don't have one and people had to see, well, would the CRN be acceptable? We just went and bought one. And it took about 24 hours, and we paid for it €65, and we're done with it. And we're registered now. So don't let it be a blocker. In the beginning last year, the regulators said you had to have an LEI for a third party if they were based in Europe. I think they relented, and maybe somebody can put in the text and said they'll accept a CRN if the third party doesn't have an LEI, because if it's an American company, third party, and they've never heard of LEI, it's very hard for you maybe to persuade them that they should get one. But anyway, there is a solution for everything. But you have to have a number in there. You can't just leave it blank. And the type. So if you're putting in a number, then you say in the next field, this is an LEI or this is a CRN or whatever the number is, EU ID, as in European Union ID, they're acceptable as well. This was a common one, the ultimate parent missing information. If you put in a third party, there is a question in there of the ID of the ultimate parent of that third party. And if that third party is the ultimate parent of their organization, then you repeat the number. But if you've got a second number and you put that into a 501, then you've got to put in an extra record for the ultimate parent in your third party list. They're not supplying the service as such, but you need them in table 0501 as a third party. Now, they're an ultimate parent third party and nothing else is linked to them, but you're pointing to them and you need that detail. I'll show you that in a moment when we look at the referential integrity pitfalls. Now, I could have listed out a bunch of fields like currency and cost that were missing. You know, the recovery time objective wasn't so much missing as if you wrote in 2 hours, that would be rejected. They just want the 2, they just want the number. But there's a lot of fields, and if you go through the data model, you can see which fields are mandatory, which is most of them. And if they're blank, your report will get rejected. I've just picked out a bunch here that were common offenders. A lot of dates, you may not have an end date in the contract, and that's okay, because you might be renewing it every year. So there's no end date as such. But you do have to put a date in, and that's 9999/12/31. That's the default date. You can't leave these fields blank. Look, all of this information is in the detail. If you read the detail, by the way, I'm just picking up the sort of things that you can pick up fairly quickly. Certainly there's 3 date fields there. Again, don't leave them blank. You put in the default, which is 9999/12/31. And that's another thing. Dates are always in year, month, day, always in that format. And if you saved, ultimately you've got to save all of this information in CSV, as in common separated format files. And if you open them with Excel to have a look, be aware that Excel will change the date from this format into day, month, year, based on your regional settings. So don't open a CSV file with Excel. Open it with Notepad, better still, Notepad++. Yeah, license activities associated with the functions. It's not enough just to put in the function. You need to have at least one activity in there. You can have multiple, but you need to have at least one activity. And again, the supporting functions there, they're optional, but you will have at least one activity with each function. 2, I'm just going to wet the whistle here. Case sensitivity is probably the best way of starting off this one. Who would have thought that whether it was a capital C or a lowercase c in the column of a data set, that would get rejected, but it will. So when you've got your column headings, think of it in Excel. I know you're going to export it to CSV, or in our case, we now have a one button where you can create the whole zipped file and don't have to worry about exporting from Excel to CSV and running a macro. But ultimately, that first row in the CSV file should have references like C0010, C0020, but a lowercase c. And the table names or the file names that are in your zipped file, they have to be with a lowercase b, not an uppercase b. It'll get rejected. Whereas the filings indicators file, which is one of those, ultimately, I think about 19 files, it has the reference of all the tables you're submitting, and that has to be in uppercase. I didn't write the rules. Don't beat me up. The case sensitivity is important. Well, the case is important because it'll get rejected if you have the wrong case. LEIs, all LEIs have 20 characters. The first 18 can be alphanumeric, the last two are numeric. They should have 20. It doesn't include the letters LEI, just the number. There's a separate field to put in the acronym LEI. Dates, as I said, this is a formatting one, always in year, month, day. Never day, month, year. Always in this, and with the hyphen. So year, month, day. And then the folders. The graphic here is showing you, I've taken this from the EBA's documentation. Think of it as you have a folder with two subfolders, one called reports and one called meta INF. And the case is important here as well. And then in the reports folder, you have a report.json file, which doesn't change, parameters file, which probably, well, you know, once you've set it up, it probably doesn't change ever again. Findings, indicators, and then your 14 tables that we were looking at. There is an optional 15th one, which is on your definitions. And then another JSON file reports package. Again, it's for the ingesting system, basically telling it what it's receiving. So you set all this up in folders and then you zip that into a file, and it's the zipped file that you submit to the regulator. Now, in our system this year, to make it easier for our customers, last year they had to export to Excel, run a macro to convert to CSV, and then zip them all together. We do that now with one button from the application. So that saves a bit of a hassle. You think it's not much work, but last year, some customers submitted 30 times. And I heard one war story from another company, not a customer, who submitted 50 times. So yeah, one button will save a bit of time. So formatting, case sensitivity, important. I've given you the not all of them here, but for the most part. Again, I'll show you, get the reference to documents where you can look up more detail. Duplicates. If you remember the data model and it's looking for a reference in another table, it's important that where you have primary keys, and the concept of a primary key is that it's never repeated. So if a third-party service provider, their LEI is the index, and you should only have them in the 501 once. You might have 5 contracts with them, and we have some clients with multiple contracts with the same service provider, but they only appear once in 501. If you put them in twice, it'll be seen as a duplicate and will be rejected. Table 202 is probably, as I said, the longest one and the most complicated, but here it's more the opposite. They're looking for multiple records, which might look like duplicates, but if there's any change in 10, 20, 30, 50, 60, 130, 150, 160, and that's the contract reference number, the LEI, and the code of the service, the country provision, the country of where the data is stored, or countries. And if you've 2 countries where data is stored, then everything doubles. And if you've 2 countries where the information or the service is provided, then you got 4 records. And every time there's a change in one of these numbers here, it's an additional bunch of records, one for each activity and everything. So you can quickly get a lot of additional records. That's what they want. They wanted that granularity. And yes, if you repeated this combination, it will be seen as a duplicate. I think in here it's more the absence of a detail rather than a duplicate, but I thought I'd put it in here. Referential integrity. Now, I know most of you are not IT people or software people, so let me just explain very briefly with one example here. If we take 0102 is the list of financial entities within the scope. So your entities, you might just have one in here, and you might have several. And you have the LEI of that entity in that file in 0102. You will reference that in 3.1, 3.3, 1.3, and 4.1. And you can see the dark line here going back to the other table. So it's pointing back. This is like a database, and it's a relationship diagram. But in those 4 tables in the middle, they need to find that LEI back in the other table. And if you have an LEI in any one of these 4 tables in the middle and it's not in the first one, it'll get rejected because it has to be the master, if you like, is the one on the left. So when you read the instructions, it says as defined in 0102. But if you look at the data model, you can see the relationship. So that's one. So there, that's a basic one. And there's lots of these relationships. You can see the ones on the right as well, where they're in other tables. The contractual arrangement in 0201, top right there, that's referenced in these tables as well. Again, if you put in a contract reference number in one of these tables and you don't have it in 0201, it'll get rejected because basically the software that's ingesting this will say it's pointing to a record over here, but I don't have one over here. That's basically what these lines mean. This is one that caught a number of people out. And I'm pointing here with the arrow to the reference within the table itself. So if you have a third-party service provider and you've put in their identification code in 10, in field 10, but in 110, you're asked to put in the identification code of the ultimate parent. Now, if you decide, well, they are their own ultimate parent, then you repeat that number in 110 that's in 10. But if you say, oh, I looked it up and yeah, their parent is in America and this is their ID number, and you put that in, then you have to put an additional record in table 05 for the ultimate parent, because 110 is looking back in the rest of the table for the additional information about the ultimate parent. And if it doesn't find an additional record, then it'll reject your file and say referential integrity, you don't have a record for the ultimate parent. It's a simple enough thing. I mean, the ultimate parent, you've no contract with them and you don't need to put a contract reference in there. You just need to put in the ultimate parent and you can define them as an ultimate parent. So they're not getting picked up in the other tables in the report. But that's one that caught a lot of people. And this is another one that, again, it was really just, I saw it with customers who had multiple contracts with the one supplier. Let me try to explain it. If you have multiple contracts, then on table 201, you will have a record for each contract. You can see here the contract arrangement reference number, and you'll have a cost for that contract. So let's say you have 3 contracts with a third party, and let's say each is a value of 10,000. Let's keep it modest. Then in 0501, you will have one record saying 30,000 because it's the one third party. You don't have 3 third parties, you have one third party. So 0501 is the sum of those 3 records that's in 0201. Now, I think that caught a few people as well, people who had multiple contracts, because you're basically you're just putting the third party in once, so you'd have to manually sum up the 3 contracts. Now, what we've done in our report generator, we just do a sum. We group it by the third party and we sum the cost. So that's built in. But if you're doing this manually, be aware of that. Okay, I think that's kind of the pitfalls. I'm going to give you a reference to 2 other documents, and you can look for more. There's a bit more detail, but if you get all of those, you'll be well on the road to a clean submission. What frustrated people last year with the submissions is that if you had 5 errors, it took 5 submissions to find the 5, because the first time you submitted it, when it hit the first error, it got rejected and came back, and you fixed that first error, and then you submitted it again and it found the second and the third. Now, as long as the structure, as long as you've got that, the way the files are in folders and zipped, as long as that structure and the files is correct. If you've got 10 errors in there, in the first submission, you'll get the 10 errors. So I suspect what will happen is, instead of having to submit it 30 times to get it through, you might actually reduce that to 3, because you're getting good information. Not only are you getting all of the errors, I'm going to say most of them, I won't say all either, but you're getting better error messages. I mean, last year, if I remember correctly, one of the error messages was object not set to an instance of the object. Object not set to an instance of the object. Now, a software programmer would probably readily understand that, because I have actually seen, I'm not a software programmer, but I've seen it. Now they're putting the error messages in, I would say, more human-readable, normal human-readable language. The other frustrating thing last year was the portal was open for 4 days. For many of you, and I know many of you are customers as well online, this was a very stressful week, just 4 days. And we saw other countries who had the portal open for a whole month. Now, the good news is that this year in Ireland, it's open for the month of March, from the 2nd to the 31st. I think in Malta, I'm going to say it's open already and closing on the 21st of March. And I think Luxembourg closing on the 1st of March. But it's been open already for well over a month. I know we've people dialing in today from the UK, from Malta, Cyprus, Luxembourg. I'd say check your own dates, but the EBA date is 31st. Actually, I have that on the next slide. There was one change to the report on JSON where they wanted some information. You can see it here. I've put in the calQrisk information on what generated this report. But yeah, here are the dates. Yeah, the CBI is open on the 2nd, so the fund starts next week. The EBA's deadline is the 31st, and CBI have said their portal is open until the 31st. But I would say start submitting early. If it's your first time submitting, it will take a few goes. Despite your best efforts to spot all of the missing information and other pitfalls, it will be very rare to get it in first time. So get your submission in early so you can start fixing whatever issues you have. And as I said, if you're from Luxembourg or Malta, Cyprus, or the UK, check with your local regulator as to when you need to submit. Both CBI and all the other regulators have generated and have published guidance documentation. I'll give you the 2 websites. Now, you'll be getting a copy of these slides, but I copied the link so you can see it here, and you can take a screenshot of that if you wish. But in each of these pages, if you go to these websites, there are many documents that you might want to download and reference. Certainly the data model, and certainly guidance for submission. Maybe the errors. There's a good one from the EBA on the errors they saw last year. So, as I said, it'll supplement this webinar, but I hope I've given you a little bit of an insight and encourage you. Look, there is light at the end of the tunnel. All of these are eminently fixable, and not to be scared of. Okay, so check out those 2 websites. Lots of good information, and updated after last year. So I think that's about me. I've left a bit of time if you have questions. No problem if you don't, but if you have, go into the Q&A, and I'll just see if there's any in there myself. I'm just going to have a look. If we filed last year as an individual to the CBI, and this year we are filing as a consolidated filing outside of Ireland, do we need to do anything with the CBI submission? You don't say who if you're outside of Ireland, who do you come under? Generally, I mean, you kind of pick a country, and you do the consolidated in that country. If it is consolidated, I mean, you could do 2 individual ones. So I'm not sure if I have all of the information. File as an individual to the CBI this year, or filing. Maybe it's one of your other entities is filing elsewhere and including you in that submission. I wouldn't be qualified to fully answer that, so I would say um, um, check with your advisor on that. But I would imagine that if you're filing in Luxembourg, you don't have to file in Ireland if it's consolidated in Luxembourg. So, do we report all ICT vendors, or does that need to be only the critical ICT providers? That's a good question. The regulator would like you to report all ICT vendors, whether they're critical or not. I would say at a minimum, you have to do all the critical ones. They would say to you, yeah, report all of them, and it gives them a better picture. But when I read it, I understood it was only the critical ones that were included. But there will become a time where they will mandate all. I don't think it's there yet. Again, check it out. But if anybody else can answer that question, please put it in the Q&A. I think it's only critical for now, but I think it will become all. I don't think it is just yet. It is Luxembourg. Do we need to take any action in Ireland? Jennifer, well, I assume that's on the first question. If you're consolidating in Luxembourg and you're reporting on both in Luxembourg, you don't have to report the detail for Ireland in both countries if you're doing it in one. That would be my understanding. It would make sense if you're consolidating and doing both. But look, you probably have consultants on this who know that rule better than me. I'm just the, if you like, getting the information into the report guy, but check that one out. Look, I'll tell you when I don't know, and I don't know for sure, but common sense tells me that if you're reporting in one country, you don't need to report in the other, if the information is there, if you've got the detail. In tab 102, value of total assets of the financial entity, would this be the total spend on the vendors reported or the total spend by the company? It's not spend, it's assets. 0102 and 0102 is about you are the financial entity. Third parties are not financial entities. The total spend on vendors. No, it's not the total spend on vendors. That's in 0501 when they look at the total. That's, I think, a measure of the size of your company, of your organization. If you draw down the ITS, look at the ITS and look at the detail instruction on a 102, they do explain it in detail. Denise, hi Gerard, we've just bought the DORA module and we'll be starting. Okay, that's a customer. Can you remind me, does the module generate the information register when all completed? Well, thank you for asking that question, Denise. Yeah, the answer is a great yes. And as I said, we generate the report, and then with one button, if you're happy with the report, it'll generate the report for submission, complete with your name and the title and zipped. Yeah, customers love that this year. It's much easier. Shivam, the date format in CSV is in slash and it's not possible to change hyphenated. Okay, this was a common problem. Do not open the CSV in Excel. Okay, open it in Notepad or Notepad++. I use Notepad++. It is great. And once you've created the CSV, don't open it in Excel. Use your Notepad to open it, and you'll see that the hyphen, and you can fix it in the Notepad. If you have to fix any of the CSVs, fix them in Notepad, not Excel. I saw last year a lot of problems, even when Excel, when you say export to CSV or save in CSV, Excel has some quirks. I had to eventually write a macro, and we give this to customers. And this year we've just built it in to get a clean UTF-8. I think I had it in one of the slides that the format is UTF-8. Excel CSV is not UTF-8 by default. It has a few extra bits. And that date one, that came up a lot. And even the regulator, I was on their webinar, and they mentioned it. Don't edit the CSVs in Excel. So I'll just repeat that here. Loads of questions. Within tab 201, annual expense or estimated cost of the contractual arrangement for the past year, would it be the reporting period cost, i.e. 25 for this year's reporting? That would be my understanding. That it's for the, if you're doing it to the end of 2025, then it is for the year. for the year 2025. Again, if anybody has a different opinion on that, put it into the Q&A as a comment. For intergroup arrangements, how can we report this? My entity has one intergroup agreement for several ICT services. Should I report this contract several times and identify the different ICTs? You have to identify the ICT subcontractors. This is anonymous. You have an intergroup, and let's say that intergroup has signed contracts with 10 subcontractors. You need to report the details of those 10. They're very specific about where the third party is an intergroup. Then they want to know the fourth parties. This is in a couple of tables off the top of my head. I'd have to go back to the model, but it's in two places. And this is why I said start collecting the data now, because what a lot of customers found is they don't have the detail on the fourth parties. They have a third party and they were blissfully maybe unaware of the details on the fourth parties. But you do need to know it. So yeah, you can report it, but you have to get the information. So you're going to have to ask your intergroup to give you the details on your fourth parties. Is there an ROI template available? The template is the data model I showed you. But as you can see, it's not a simple Excel spreadsheet. It's 14 with links between them. So it's actually a relational database. So I would say to you, Nigel, talk to us, because we've created that database, and you can put the information to ours, and we generate the report. But yeah, it's not one template. It's if you're doing this by hand, it's think about it. It's 14 Excel spreadsheets, and there's information that is pointing to information in other spreadsheets. I think it would wreck my head if I tried to do it manually. Violetta, for certain calls where not applicable would need to be used, there was a difference between the information on the taxonomy from the EBA. It stated to use NA, whereas on the CPI portal, the ROI, the file only went through if the cells were left blank. Has this been fixed since last year? A very good one, Violetta. The best advice I could give is look at the EBA's FAQ document, frequently asked questions document. They updated it a few times last year, and there were a few of those where it was not applicable and there wasn't a code, and they added a code for not applicable, or they said leave it blank. But those were frustrating as to which ones do you leave blank and which ones do you actually put in a code that said not applicable. Without knowing the specific one, but I mean, if you wanted to email me with the specific one, I would tell you what we did last year on that. But it was a bit frustrating because there wasn't one answer that would suit for all of them. Some you could leave. If you look at the data model, the last column in the list of tables, it's set where there could be null, and if it said yes and it could be null, then you could basically leave it blank. That's basically what that's saying. I would go to the EBA for the truth on this as to what you need. Shivan, how to save it? To see what question that is. Oh, the CSV. Will you save your file? That was regarding opening Notepad. You save Notepad. It's just like any editor, but it's a very basic editor. And open it in Notepad and just save it. File save as. You can see in Notepad as well that it is UTF-8 format. You can actually you can save in different formats. Now, I did read somewhere, although I don't trust it, that you can save in UTF-BOM. But last year we found get a clean UTF-8 format, nothing else if you want to sail through. Okay, guys, we're coming up to 1:15. They're great questions, I have to say. I would stress again, I'm not giving legal advice on the Register of Information. Do ask whoever your advisor is on that to interpret that. But so I'm giving my opinion, and I just want to qualify that. But a lot of the answers are found in that FAQ document from the EBA. you can, when you go into do a search for, let's say, 0601, if you do a search by the section, you'll very quickly maybe find the question. There's about 150 questions in there, and there's good stuff. Questions like this that people have asked, what do I put in here? And what we found last year is that on the fly, both CBI and EBA were making changes because they were learning as well, like that not applicable one. They realized they didn't have an option for not applicable, and they were asking people to put in something. And so they had to give an option. So it is a live document. I would imagine now, after many thousands of people making submissions, that it is they've addressed those somewhere. But happy, I've looked for a few of these for customers as well. If I don't know the answer, I'm fairly good at ferreting out the answer, and I have submitted direct questions to the ABA where I couldn't find the answer. So I'm happy to share any of those with people. Okay, I think that's it. I think we got all the questions. Oh, sorry, there's more questions in. Oh yeah. Can we delete the vendor that was reported in last submission? Delete, I would say you set the status to terminated. Better than just deleting, because you want to keep the historical information. Just set it to, if you're a customer of ours, just set it to status terminated, and it won't get pulled into any report. They don't want to know about the terminated ones. There's a space, why did you terminate? But you're never going to be reporting, not in this report anyway, the terminated ones. Can we delete the vendor that was reported as submission as if they were reported incorrectly and need to include all the vendors? Yeah, same thing. Just set it to terminated and don't include them. Where'd you get your LEI in Ireland? I think it was LEI Ireland, and I think it was actually a company in Lithuania, but they had an LEI Ireland website. It's international. It doesn't have to be bought in Ireland, but it was for an Irish company. If you send me an email, I'll send you the account. I think it was called LEI Ireland, was the account. Okay, folks, gone over the time. Hopefully you got something from that. And as I said, on the slide, if I go back to the slides, my email address is on the last slide. And send me an email if you have a question. If I can help, I will. Okay. Thank you, and bye-bye. For those of you still listening, we actually have workshops on third parties coming up in April. So watch the website for those workshops. Okay, take care.